Story number 1.
I moved into my new apartment with the excitement that anyone would feel when stepping into their first solo space. It was a modest one-bedroom unit on the top floor of an old building, nestled in a quiet part of the city. The apartment was affordable, given the area, and while the place was a bit outdated, I thought it had a certain charm. The hardwood floors creaked underfoot and the windows rattled with the wind, but I didn't mind. It felt like the perfect place for a fresh start. I had spent months searching for a place that was both within my budget and close to work. So when I found this apartment, I jumped on it. The landlord, an elderly woman named Mrs. Richardson, seemed nice enough. She was friendly and welcoming when I met her, explaining that the apartment had been vacant for a while after the previous tenant, a young woman named Laura, had moved out suddenly. Mrs. Richardson didn't offer much more information than that, but I didn't ask. It wasn't like I was expecting any deep, dark secrets to come with the lease. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time unpacking, rearranging the furniture, and getting comfortable in my new surroundings. The neighborhood was peaceful, and the apartment itself had a quiet, lived-in feel. The only thing that stood out was a faint, musty smell that lingered in the air, but I figured that was just from the old building. A few candles here and there would take care of that, or so I thought. But as the days passed, I began to notice things that I couldn't explain. It started with the lights. I would leave for work in the morning, making sure to turn off all the lights, only to return in the evening to find one or two of them flickering or even on. At first, I thought it was just me being forgetful, but this happened too often to ignore. I asked Mrs. Richardson if there had been any issues with the wiring, but she assured me everything was fine. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just an old building quirk, but the strange occurrences kept happening. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I returned home to find the door to my bedroom wide open. I was sure I had closed it before leaving. My heart raced for a moment, but I convinced myself that I had just forgotten. I shut the door and went about my evening. That night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of soft footsteps. I lay in bed, frozen, trying to make sense of the noise. It was faint, almost as if someone was walking around in the apartment, but I was the only one there. I tried to dismiss it as the building settling or the wind outside, but the sound persisted. Slowly, it grew louder and closer until I could almost feel the presence of someone standing in the doorway. I must have drifted back to sleep because when I woke up the next morning, everything seemed normal. But I couldn't shake the unease I felt, and as the days passed, it only got worse. A few nights later, I decided to try something different. I set up my phone to record the sounds in the apartment while I slept. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I needed some kind of evidence to make sense of what was happening. When I reviewed the recording the next morning, my stomach dropped. The footsteps were there, clear as day, and just as I thought, they were coming from my bedroom. But there was more. I could hear soft whispers in the background like someone was speaking, but the words were unintelligible. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The apartment felt wrong, like there was someone, there with me. I had always been a rational person, but these experiences were starting to unravel my sense of reality. The idea of leaving crossed my mind, but I wasn't in a position to just pack up and go. So I decided to do some research. I spent the next few days digging into the history of the building. I learned that it was over 100 years old, and like many old buildings in the area, it had a storied past. But one piece of information stood out. The apartment I was renting had a history of strange occurrences. The previous tenant, Laura, had been living there for just under a year before she abruptly moved out in the middle of the night. There were no details about why, but the neighbors recalled hearing strange noises coming from her apartment. Footsteps, knocking, and whispering voices. Some even claimed to have seen her standing in the window, staring out into the street, her eyes wide with fear. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was as if the events that had plagued Laura were now happening to me. I reached out to her family, hoping to find some answers. Her mother responded, but only vaguely. She said that Laura had become withdrawn and seemed to be constantly on edge during her time in the apartment. She had started mentioning hearing voices and seeing things out of the corner of her eyes. The last time they had spoken, Laura had mentioned feeling as if something was watching her, but when she tried to describe it, the words seemed to escape her. I was shaken by the conversation. Could this be the same thing? Was I next in line to be driven out of the apartment just like Laura? It didn't make sense, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been experiencing many of the same things she had. The whispers, the footsteps, the cold spots in the apartment. It was all too similar. I knew I had to leave, but it wasn't as easy as just packing up and walking out. The strange occurrences had become more intense. I would wake up to the sound of someone breathing right next to me, only to find no one there when I opened my eyes. Sometimes I would see shadows moving across the walls or catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. But the worst part was the feeling of being watched. Every time I was alone in the apartment, I felt it, a heavy, suffocating presence, as if something was always just behind me, waiting for me to turn around. One evening, I decided to confront whatever was in the apartment. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe some kind of closure or an explanation. I stood in the middle of the living room, speaking out loud. "I don't know what you want, but I'm not leaving. I won't let you scare me." At first, there was nothing, but then the temperature dropped. The air grew thick, heavy, and I could feel a chill crawl up my spine. The lights began to flicker, and the floorboards groaned underfoot. I heard the faint sound of footsteps, but this time they weren't coming from the hallway. They were coming from inside the apartment, closer and closer still. Then I heard the voice. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind, but it quickly grew louder. It was a woman's voice, low and guttural. "Leave. Leave, before it's too late." My heart pounded in my chest. I turned toward the voice, but there was no one there. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing in as if they were going to swallow me whole. I didn't know how much longer I could take this. I ran out of the apartment, slamming the door behind me, but the feeling of dread followed me into the hallway. I never returned to that apartment. I moved out the next day, unable to shake the feeling of being haunted. No matter where I went after that, I felt the presence of something dark and oppressive, watching me, following me. It was as if the apartment had become a part of me, a shadow that I couldn't outrun. Years have passed since I left that place, but every now and then I'll hear whispers in the dark or feel a cold breeze brushing against my skin. And I'll remember that apartment, the apartment that seemed to have a life of its own, a life that didn't want me to leave. Story the end.
Story number 2.
When I moved into my new apartment, I was genuinely excited. It was the first time I'd be living alone, and I'd finally found a place I could afford that didn't look like it belonged in a horror movie. It was a one-bedroom on the third floor of an older building in a quieter part of the city. The floors were creaky, and the plumbing was clearly old, but I convinced myself that was just part of the charm. My lease started on the first of the month, say, and I moved in over the course of 2 days. By the third day, everything was mostly in place and I was ready to settle in. The first night, I barely slept. Not because I was scared, but because I wasn't used to the sounds of the building. There were these odd thumps at random intervals, followed by what sounded like water rushing through the pipes. I assumed it was just neighbors flushing toilets or walking too hard on the creaky floors. I kept telling myself, old buildings have character. The second night, I noticed something strange. Around 3:30 a.m., I heard knocking. Not just the random creaks and groans from before. This was deliberate. 3 knocks. Then silence. I sat up in bed and listened. After about 10 seconds, it happened again. 3 knocks. This time it was louder. It seemed to be coming from the wall behind my bed. I got up and turned on the light, heart racing. I pressed my ear to the wall, but it was silent. I figured maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe their headboard hitting the wall or something. I went back to bed and forced myself to ignore it. It happened one more time before I finally fell asleep around 4:30. The following morning, I went to greet my neighbor on the other side of the wall to ask if they'd been doing any work or moving furniture late at night. When I knocked on their door, an elderly woman opened it. She looked like she hadn't slept well in weeks. Hi, I just moved in next door. I was wondering if you heard anything weird last night, like knocking? I asked. She gave me a long stare. Her eyes looked tired, almost hollow. You're in 3C? Yes. She hesitated, then said, Just ignore it. Don't open your door if you hear it again. Just don't. I was caught off guard by her answer. I'm sorry, do you know something about it? But she just muttered, Be careful, and slowly closed her door without another word. That was unsettling. That night I was more alert. I kept a small lamp on in the bedroom and left my door slightly open. I lay in bed reading until just after 3 a.m. Then I waited. Around 3:28 a.m., the knocking started. 3 loud, deliberate knocks. I jumped up and followed the sound. It wasn't the wall this time. It was the front door. I walked to the door slowly, unsure of what I'd find. There was no peephole, so I stood there, frozen, listening. Another 3 knocks. The air felt heavy. My palms were sweating. Something about the sound felt wrong, off rhythm, hollow, as if it came from within the door instead of outside. I stepped back and didn't open it. It didn't happen again that night, but I didn't sleep either. The next morning, I called the landlord and asked if anything strange had happened in 3C. He went quiet for a second and then gave a weak laugh. Ah, I see you've met the knocking. Yeah, it's an old building, pipes and wood shift. You'll get used to it. I pressed him again, but he insisted nothing strange had ever been officially reported. I hung up unconvinced. The next few nights were quiet. No knocks, no weird noises, just the usual creaks. I started to think maybe it was just in my head. Maybe stress from the move, lack of sleep, my overactive imagination. That changed on the 7th night. I had just come out of the shower when I noticed that the mirror was fogged up more than usual. The steam clung thick to the glass, and through it, I noticed what looked like letters. At first, I thought it was just streaks, but the longer I stared, the more it became clear. Let me in. I wiped the mirror quickly, half expecting something to be standing behind me. There was nothing. My hands were trembling, and I had this cold feeling in my chest. I stepped out into the hallway and heard the sound again. 3 knocks, but not on the door. This time, it was on the bedroom window. I rushed in, pulled back the curtain, and saw nothing but the alley behind the building. I was 3 floors up. No balconies, no ledges. Just the brick wall of the adjacent building about 12 feet across. I didn't sleep that night either. I called a friend the next morning and asked if I could crash at their place for a night or two. I didn't tell them what was really going on, just that I was overwhelmed from the move. They agreed, and I packed a small bag. Before I left, I unplugged everything and double-checked all the windows and doors. When I returned 2 days later, something felt off the moment I opened the door. The air inside was colder than it should have been. It was spring, and I had no AC running. I walked in slowly, and the first thing I noticed was the hallway mirror, smeared like someone had dragged their fingers down it. The smears looked recent. I checked every room, every closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. Then I found it. On the living room floor, just under the coffee table, was a Polaroid. I didn't own a Polaroid camera. The photo was of me, sleeping. The timestamp in the bottom right corner showed it was taken 2 nights ago, the night I was at my friend's place. I dropped it and ran out. I stood in the hallway, breathing hard, trying to convince myself that maybe someone had a spare key. Maybe the landlord came in for some reason. I called him again, demanding to know if anyone had entered the unit. He swore up and down that no one had been there. I asked if he had a record of anyone else ever complaining about the unit. He hesitated. There was a guy, he finally said. Before you. He didn't stay long. 1 month, I think. He broke his lease, said he couldn't sleep, that the place was messing with his head. What happened to him, I asked. No idea. Disappeared off the grid. That night, I locked myself in the bedroom. I didn't even want to look out the windows. I blocked the cracks under the doors with towels and left every light on. I laid in bed with a knife under my pillow. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the lights went out. Not a power surge, not a flicker. Everything went dark instantly. I sat up, heart pounding, frozen. The knocking started again, but this time it was everywhere. The front door, the bedroom window, the wall behind me. 3 knocks, one after the other, then silence. Then again, 3 knocks, then silence. Again, and again. Then the door handle started to rattle. I held my breath. The silence that followed was worse. I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, faintly, I heard breathing inside the room, not mine, slow, heavy, like someone standing at the foot of the bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just shut my eyes and waited for it to be over. After what felt like hours, I opened them to daylight. The lights were back on. Everything was in place, no signs of forced entry, nothing out of place. I convinced myself it had to be a night terror, a very vivid one. Until I checked the hallway mirror. Another message. You saw me? That was the final straw. I called a moving service that day and told them to pack everything, whatever fit in a truck. I didn't care what it cost. I called my friend again and begged to stay with them. I didn't even go back to the apartment. I let the movers do everything while I waited at a cafe across town. I never saw that apartment again. I broke the lease and never returned the keys. The landlord didn't even bother asking why. Weeks later, after I moved into a new place with roommates, I still had trouble sleeping. Every night I feared hearing that knock again. Sometimes I dreamed of it. Sometimes I'd wake up at exactly 3:33 a.m., drenched in sweat. One night, I was looking through my moving boxes trying to find a book when I found something odd. A small envelope, no address, no name. Inside was another Polaroid. Me again, sleeping. But this time I wasn't alone in the picture. There was something standing behind me. Thin, pale, barely human. Story the end.
Story number 3.
I moved into the apartment on a Saturday morning in late September. It was the kind of move you make when you're tired of bouncing from roommate to roommate and want something quieter, something more stable. The building was nothing special. 3 stories of red brick, built sometime in the 60s, with dark green carpeting in the hallways and a stale scent of mildew faintly trapped in the stairwells. My unit was on the 2nd floor, tucked between 2 others, and the rent was cheap enough to feel like a steal. The landlord, a wiry man named Gary, who lived on the 1st floor, handed me the keys with barely more than a grunt and a nod. The place was already cleaned when I got there. Surprisingly clean, in fact. The windows had been wiped, the floor mopped, and there was a slight lemony smell in the air, like someone had just finished dusting. There were no furnishings, just 4 bare rooms and a kitchen. I brought in my bed, a desk, some bookshelves, and a few bags of clothes. That first night, I barely had anything set up. I slept on the mattress with a single blanket, too tired to care that the light in the hallway flickered every time I passed. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps. Not loud, not heavy, just slow and deliberate, as though someone was pacing in the hallway outside my door. At first I thought it was one of the neighbors, but the steps stopped directly in front of my apartment. Then silence. I waited, heart thudding, but nothing followed. No knock, no retreating footsteps. Just quiet. I told myself I was tired, that I imagined it, and drifted back to sleep. The second night was similar. I heard the same slow footsteps sometime after midnight. They stopped outside my door again, and this time I sat up and held my breath. After a few seconds, I got up, walked over to the peephole, and peered out. The hallway was empty. No one. Not a soul. But the light flickered again, as if someone had just passed beneath it. I mentioned it to Gary the next day, half-jokingly asking if the place was haunted. He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. "You probably just heard the pipes," he muttered, looking away. "Old building, sound travels weird." Still, I started locking my door at night, and I kept a heavy flashlight by my bed just in case. Over the next week, little things started happening. I'd find the window in the kitchen cracked open in the mornings, even though I was certain I'd closed it the night before. My bathroom mirror would be fogged up sometimes, as if someone had taken a long hot shower. But I hadn't. I lived alone. I showered in the mornings. One night, I came home from work and found the lights in my bedroom on. I never left them on. At first, I thought maybe Gary had entered the unit for some maintenance reason. I confronted him in the hallway a few days later. He denied it, flatly. "I don't go in unless I need to," he said. "You'd know if I needed to." Then he hesitated, like he wanted to say something else but didn't. I pressed him. "Did something happen in that apartment?" He looked me dead in the eyes, jaw clenched. Then he shook his head slowly. "You'll be fine," he said, and walked off. It was not the reassurance I was hoping for. About 2 weeks into living there, I started hearing something new. Whispers. They came in the late hours of the night, soft and unintelligible. It wasn't coming from the neighbors. I could tell. The voices were too close, like they were in the room with me. I'd sit up in bed, straining to listen, but the moment I moved, they would stop. They were always just out of reach, just beneath my ability to understand. One night, I left my phone recording while I slept. In the morning, I listened to it. For the first hour or so, there was nothing but the occasional rustle of sheets or creak of the bed. Then around 2:43 a.m., I heard it, a low, murmuring voice, almost like someone reciting a prayer. The words weren't clear, but the tone was rhythmic, almost chanting. Then there was a pause, followed by a long, slow breath that wasn't mine. I froze. I replayed it a dozen times. It wasn't the sound of someone breathing near the phone. It was the kind of breath you'd hear if someone was standing over you. I didn't sleep the next night. I kept every light on and sat on the couch until morning, my eyes glued to the hallway, waiting. I called my sister that day and told her everything. She offered to let me stay at her place, but I didn't want to seem crazy. Not yet. The next evening, I noticed something strange in the bathroom. The corner of the ceiling near the vent had what looked like water damage, a dark brown spot spreading out in a slow, moldy bloom. I hadn't seen it before. I checked upstairs to see if there had been a leak, but the apartment above mine was empty. Gary had mentioned that it had been vacant for months. Still, I heard footsteps above me that night, dragging and scraping like someone was moving furniture. I went up the next day, unlocked the door with the spare Gary gave me just in case, and stepped inside. The place was dusty and stale. The furniture was still there, an old couch, a broken lamp, a mattress in the corner of one room, but no one had been there in a long time. Still, I felt watched. I didn't stay long. I asked Gary again, "Who lived there last?" He paused, then said, "Older woman. Kept to herself. Passed away." "How?" he hesitated. "She slipped in the shower, hit her head, wasn't found for a couple of days." Something about the way he said it didn't sit right, like he was leaving something out. I went back up later that evening, despite the unease. The air was thick and musty. I walked through each room, trying to shake the feeling of eyes on me. Then in the back bedroom, I saw it. Scratches on the wall, long and ragged, like fingernails clawing at the plaster. There were dozens of them, all centered around the corner near the window. I took a picture and showed Gary. "I don't want to talk about it," he said. I decided then I'd start looking for a new place. That night, something changed. It wasn't just footsteps or whispers anymore. I woke up to the feeling of pressure on my chest, like someone sitting on me. My arms wouldn't move. My legs were paralyzed. I tried to scream, but only a thin wheeze came out. Above me, in the dim light of the ceiling fixture, I saw a shadow, tall and thin, with hollowed eyes. It leaned down close, and I felt breath on my face. Cold, sour, like mildew and rot. Then it was gone. Just like that. My body snapped back to life, and I sat up gasping. I left the apartment the next day and stayed with my sister for 3 nights. She thought I was exaggerating until she came with me to pack up some more of my things. While we were in the kitchen, the lights went out. We thought it was the breaker, but then we heard the bedroom door slam shut. When we went to check, it was locked from the inside. I didn't even have a lock on that door. From under the door, smoke started to seep out. Not thick, not choking, just a wispy, dark mist. But it smelled like something had been burning. My sister and I bolted. We didn't even stay to grab the rest of my stuff. Gary called me a few days later. He said the apartment was available again, asking if I'd changed my mind. I asked him flat out, "Why do people leave that unit, Gary? How many people have moved out in the past year?" He went quiet. Then he said, "More than I care to admit." I asked why he didn't warn me. "They don't stay long enough to need a warning," he said. A month later, I saw an ad for the same apartment. Cheap rent. Newly cleaned. Ready to move in. I never went back. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed, I still hear that breath, that low, wheezing exhale like something just behind me. I try to tell myself it's just memory, stress, a leftover trick of the mind. But I don't sleep without the light on anymore. Story the end.
Story number 4.
It was the first apartment I'd ever signed on my own, and I was proud of it. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a dull gray building on the edge of a sleepy suburb. But it was mine. No roommates, no landlords breathing down my neck, and no shared bathroom. I signed the lease in late August after finding the listing online. The photos showed a clean, simple interior, white walls, wood laminate floors, a narrow but workable kitchen. The rent was lower than anything else I had seen, which should have tipped me off, but I was too eager for independence to question it. The building itself was nothing to write home about. It stood like a forgotten relic at the end of a cul-de-sac, nestled between an old laundromat and a boarded-up diner. The parking lot had more weeds than lines, and the intercom at the front door was broken. I met the property manager, a man named Harold, for the key exchange. He was polite, maybe a bit too polite, but I was grateful for how quickly he approved the lease. He gave me a half-hearted handshake and said, "It's a quiet place. You'll be fine." The first few days passed without incident. I moved in with minimal furniture, just a bed, a cheap couch, a coffee table, and boxes of books and kitchenware. I spent the weekend unpacking, playing music loudly, and feeling a little giddy every time I walked around barefoot in my own space. I didn't notice anything unusual until the third night. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of knocking. At first, I thought it was coming from my front door, but when I got up and listened, the hallway was quiet. I went back to bed. Then I heard it again, 3 slow knocks, but this time they seemed to be coming from the bedroom wall. I put my ear to the drywall. Nothing. I knocked back. Silence. Maybe it was the neighbors. Maybe I was just tired. I told myself not to make a big deal out of it. The next day, I asked around. The unit on my left was vacant, according to Harold. The one on my right was occupied by an older woman named Mrs. Weiss, who I hadn't yet met. I introduced myself later that evening when I saw her checking her mail. She was small and frail, wearing a heavy cardigan despite the heat. When I asked about the knocking, her face went blank. "You hear it too?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "It's been going on for years," she whispered, glancing back at the building like she was afraid someone would hear. "Mostly at night. Always 3 knocks, sometimes more. I stopped answering a long time ago." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded awkwardly and went back upstairs. That night, I put in earplugs and tried to forget about it. It didn't help. By the end of the week, the knocking turned into something else. One night, I heard scratching, faint, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging along the inside of the wall. It came from the same spot where I had heard the knocking, near the bedroom corner. I flipped on the lights and inspected the wall, expecting to see water damage or pests, but there was nothing. Just paint and plaster. The sound stopped the moment I touched the wall. The next day, I came home from work and found the bedroom window open. I never opened it. I kept it locked. The screen had been pushed out and was lying in the grass 3 stories below. Nothing was missing, and there was no sign of forced entry, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. I called Harold and told him what happened. He sighed like he'd heard it before. "It's probably just a draft," he said. "That window sticks sometimes. Maintenance can look at it later this week." I bought a new lock and added it to the window myself. A few days later, I noticed the cold spots. I'd be walking through the hallway or sitting in the living room when suddenly I'd feel a chill, like someone had opened a freezer behind me. The air would thicken. My skin would goosebump. It lasted no more than a minute, but it kept happening, and always in the same places, the hallway outside the bathroom and the corner of the bedroom where the knocking had come from. One night, I woke up to the sound of my closet door creaking open. It was a slow, deliberate noise. I lay still, staring into the darkness, heart pounding. I hadn't left it open. I was sure of that. The apartment was silent, except for the faint rustle of fabric, like someone shifting around inside. I turned on the lamp, heart thudding, and walked over. The closet was empty, the clothes swaying slightly on their hangers. I started keeping the light on while I slept. A few nights later, I heard the voice. It was faint, just a whisper, coming from the far side of the bedroom. I was half asleep at the time, drifting in that space between dreams and awareness. At first, I thought it was my phone, maybe an audio notification or a video that had accidentally started. But when I sat up, the voice continued. I couldn't understand what it was saying, just a low, breathy mutter. It stopped the moment I turned on the lamp. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I noticed something new on the bedroom wall. Near the corner, at about waist height, the paint was cracked and flaking, revealing a small patch of old wallpaper beneath. I picked at it absent-mindedly and uncovered more, floral print, faded and yellowed with time. The kind of pattern you'd see in a 1950s home. I was about to peel more when I stopped. There were scratches beneath the wallpaper, deep ones. Not like someone moving furniture or accidentally bumping the wall. These were intentional, jagged, vertical, like fingernails. I backed away and felt nauseated. I covered the spot again and left the apartment for the day. That evening, I saw Mrs. Weiss again. I asked her if she'd ever heard the voice. She stared at me, trembling slightly. "You should leave," she said. "You really should. They don't like new people. You make noise. You move things around. They notice." "Who's they?" I asked, my voice low. She didn't answer. I started sleeping at my sister's place 2 or 3 nights a week, just to feel normal again. But every time I came back, it felt worse. The air was heavier. The cold spots lingered longer. The apartment started smelling faintly of damp earth, like soil or rotting wood. I bought candles and air fresheners, but it didn't help. My plants wilted. My phone stopped charging in the bedroom. My alarm clock reset itself twice in 1 week. One night, I came home late and found all the kitchen drawers open. Every single one. Silverware scattered. Cabinet doors ajar. My fridge door slightly cracked, a puddle of water forming on the tile. I stood there in silence, listening. The apartment was dead quiet. I backed out and slept in my car. The next morning, I found Harold waiting by the front door. I don't know if someone called him or if he was just passing by, but he looked tired, older than I remembered. "I can't live here anymore," I told him. "Something's wrong with that place." He looked down for a long moment, then said, "You're not the first to say that. Then why are you still renting it?" "Because they won't leave, and no one stays long enough to matter." I felt like I was being gaslit, like the world was cracked and no one else wanted to admit it. That night, I packed up everything I could fit into my car and left. I slept at my sister's for 2 weeks while I looked for a new place. I told her bits and pieces, enough to make her believe something was off, not enough to make her think I'd lost my mind. About a month later, she drove past the building and noticed my old apartment window open again. No screen. Curtains blowing outward. "Thought you said you locked everything," she texted. I had. I never went back. I left behind a few pieces of furniture, some books, clothes I didn't care about anymore. I didn't even ask for my deposit. The silence and peace I've had since leaving is worth more than any refund. Sometimes I still dream about that apartment. I'll be standing in the bedroom, light flickering above, cold air pressing against my back. I'll hear the knocks, 3 of them. Slow and deliberate. And I'll wake up just before the closet door opens. I searched the address online a few months ago, found an old article buried deep, something from the mid-70s. A woman had gone missing in that building, young, lived alone. Her apartment had been ransacked, but there was no sign of forced entry. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises. She was never found. I printed the article, then burned it. Story the end.
Story number 5.
When I first moved into my new apartment, I wasn't looking for anything fancy. Just a 1-bedroom place, quiet enough so I could work from home and close enough to downtown that I didn't have to drive too far. I'd found the listing online. It was cheaper than I expected, but the photos looked decent. The building was a little old, but nothing out of the ordinary. The landlord, a guy named Tony, seemed nice enough, if a little eager to get someone moved in quickly. The first time I saw the unit in person, I got this weird gut feeling. Not dread exactly, just unsettled. The hallway leading to the apartment was narrow, and the lights flickered when Tony opened the door. He joked about the building being old and how he was always yelling at the super to replace bulbs more often. Inside, the unit was surprisingly clean. Hardwood floors, big windows, and even a little balcony that faced a narrow alley. The only thing that stood out was the bedroom closet door. It had a noticeable dent, like someone had punched it, and the knob looked newer than the others in the apartment. Tony said the previous tenant had a bit of an anger issue, but assured me everything had been patched up and clean since they left. I signed the lease a day later. I moved in with a few boxes and my cat, Murphy. The first night was uneventful. Murphy spent most of it exploring every inch of the apartment, meowing into corners and occasionally puffing up at nothing. I assumed he was just adjusting to the new smells and shadows. The weirdness started the second night. I woke up around 3:30 a.m. to Murphy hissing. He was sitting at the foot of the bed, staring toward the bedroom closet. I didn't see anything, but the closet door was slightly open. I knew I'd closed it before going to bed. I got up, walked over, and pulled the door shut. There was a faint click as it latched. I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. Over the next few days, things escalated. Every morning, I'd find the closet door open, wide open. At first, I thought maybe Murphy was managing to paw it open somehow, but I tried wedging a sock in the frame to keep it from moving. Still, every morning it was open, and Murphy had taken to sleeping under the couch in the living room instead of the bed. One night, I decided to stay up late and watch TV in bed with the door to the bedroom closed. Around 2:45 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped. I mean, significantly. I could see my breath in the air, and Murphy was nowhere to be found. He usually followed me to bed, but that night, he'd hidden himself somewhere else. I pulled the blanket tighter and was about to get up to check the thermostat when I heard a sound. It was the closet door creaking open. I froze. The bedroom door was shut, no windows open, no air movement. I could hear the slow groan of the hinges. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. When I pointed it toward the closet, the door was half open. I didn't get up. I couldn't move. I kept the light fixed on the darkness behind the door, but there was nothing, no shape, no movement. Then I heard a whisper. It was right behind me. Just a breath. Get out. I leapt out of bed, flicked on the overhead light, and spun around. Nothing. My apartment was dead quiet, and the closet door was now wide open. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Murphy didn't come out until the sun was up. The next day I called Tony. I told him about the closet door and the noises. He was quiet for a second before saying, "That apartment's never been quite right." I asked him what he meant. He dodged the question, said if I wanted out of the lease, he could work something out. That set off alarms in my head. I pressed him, and finally, reluctantly, he told me the last tenant had left suddenly. Not just moved out, but ran out in the middle of the night, left furniture behind, didn't even ask for the deposit. She said something about voices, he mumbled. Seeing someone in the mirror. That kind of thing. I should have left then. I really should have. But rent was cheap, and part of me still didn't fully believe it. I wanted to believe it was just stress, new apartment jitters, and maybe Murphy acting weird was rubbing off on me. The next week, I tried to ignore it. But the activity picked up. My bedroom door would open slowly in the middle of the night, even when latched. Lights flickered more often, especially in the hallway. I started to hear faint footsteps in the living room when I was alone. I even recorded it one night, left my phone on the counter with a voice recorder app running. When I played it back the next day, I heard what sounded like someone pacing back and forth, muttering under their breath. There were no words I could make out clearly, just a soft rhythm of speech. And at one point, right around 3:33 a.m., a loud bang, like someone had slapped the kitchen table. I hadn't heard it while sleeping. The next night, I dreamed of the closet. I was inside it. Not standing, sitting, trapped. I couldn't open the door. I could see the outside room through a small crack, and something was walking toward me. Tall, thin, moving oddly, almost gliding. The thing bent down, stared at me through the crack, and said, "I see you." Then it started banging on the door, louder and louder until I woke up screaming. After that, I didn't use the bedroom anymore. I moved to the couch in the living room. Murphy seemed happier there too. But that didn't stop the sounds. I heard whispering behind the walls, knocks from inside the kitchen cabinets, and on 2 occasions, my TV turned on by itself to static. No channel, just static. The volume climbed on its own until I had to unplug the entire thing. Then one night, while brushing my teeth, I saw it. In the bathroom mirror, just for a second, standing behind me in the hallway. A tall figure, too tall, its head nearly grazing the top of the door frame. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. When I looked back in the mirror, there was nothing. I started sleeping at a friend's place after that. I couldn't bring myself to stay more than an hour in the apartment alone. Murphy and I would go during the day to grab things or check the mail, but even in the daylight, the place felt wrong, heavy, like walking into a funeral home, that same stale, suffocating energy. One day, I decided to talk to my upstairs neighbor. Miss Reyes, an older woman who'd lived there for over 20 years. I caught her in the stairwell and asked if she'd heard or seen anything strange from my unit. She gave me a long look, then sighed. "You're in 2B, right?" she asked. I nodded. "That apartment's cursed. Has been since the fire." I blinked. "What fire?" She told me that about 10 years ago, a man had died in that unit. He'd been reclusive, strange, always muttering to himself in the hallways. One night, he'd set a small fire in the closet and locked himself inside. No one knew why. By the time anyone noticed the smoke, it was too late. The fire hadn't spread far, but he died of smoke inhalation. Door locked from the inside, no note, nothing. She said afterward, people who moved in never stayed more than a few months. Some said they saw him. Others claimed they'd seen someone or something else. Not human. Just wrong. I asked Tony about it again. He denied everything. Said Miss Reyes was just an old woman who liked stories. But I could tell he was lying. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I left the apartment a week later, broke the lease, took only the essentials. Murphy and I moved into a studio across town, smaller, pricier, but quiet, normal. It took months for things to feel okay again. Murphy was calmer, stopped hiding. I started sleeping through the night. But I never fully relaxed. I still don't. Sometimes at night, I wake up and swear I hear that closet door creak open again. In my head, in a dream, I don't know. And every so often, when I'm brushing my teeth, I feel the urge to look behind me in the mirror. Just in case. Story the end.
Story number 6.
When Olivia signed the lease for her new apartment, it felt like a fresh start. After years of sharing cramped spaces with roommates and dealing with their messes, noise, and occasional drama, she was finally on her own. The building was a modest, red brick complex in the outskirts of a quiet neighborhood in Portland. It wasn't fancy, but it had charm. Arched doorways, original hardwood floors, and a fire escape that offered a distant view of the Willamette River. The unit was on the second floor, and it smelled faintly of old wood and dust when she moved in. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, the property manager explained. No one really knew why. "Some people just get cold feet about living alone," he said with a shrug. Olivia didn't press it. Her first week passed uneventfully. She worked from home as a graphic designer, so she spent most of her days unpacking boxes between client projects. The nights were quiet, almost eerily so. Occasionally, she would hear footsteps from the apartment above hers, though as far as she knew, it was still vacant. The first strange thing happened on a Thursday night. Olivia was brushing her teeth when she noticed movement in the bathroom mirror. She turned quickly, but nothing was there, just her towel hanging behind the door and the faint hum of the heater. She told herself it was just a shadow from the streetlight flickering outside. But then came the scratching. It started subtly, a faint, persistent scraping sound like fingernails against plaster. It seemed to come from inside the walls and always late at night, between 2 and 3 a.m. At first, Olivia assumed it was rats or maybe raccoons in the attic. She called the landlord, who sent someone to inspect the crawl spaces. The exterminator found nothing. No droppings, no signs of infestation, no entry points. "You're lucky," he said, packing up his gear. "Most of these older buildings are full of critters. Yours is clean." But the noises didn't stop. In fact, they got louder. Soon it wasn't just scratching. There were muffled thumps, as if something was knocking against the walls. One night, she was jolted awake by what sounded like someone dragging a heavy object across the ceiling. She lay there, heart racing, straining her ears. The unit above her was supposed to be empty. The next morning, she asked the building manager about it. "Nope. Still vacant," he confirmed, flipping through his clipboard. "We haven't had anyone up there in months." Olivia tried to brush it off. Maybe the noises were carrying from another part of the building. Maybe it was just the old pipes groaning at night. She started wearing earplugs to sleep. Then the dreams began. They were always the same. Olivia standing in the hallway outside her bedroom, staring at the closed door. On the other side, someone was crying. Not just crying, sobbing, deep and guttural, like grief tearing someone apart. In the dream, she never opened the door. She would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. After the third night in a row, she started sleeping with the hallway light on. One evening, she invited her friend Mia over for dinner. Olivia needed company, needed to feel sane again. They cooked together, drank wine, laughed about college memories. Around midnight, Mia decided to crash on the couch. "I'll head out in the morning," she said, kicking off her shoes. Sometime around 3 a.m., Olivia was woken by Mia screaming. She bolted out of bed, rushing into the living room. Mia was on the couch, wild-eyed, pointing at the hallway. "There was someone in the doorway," she gasped. "A woman. Pale face, black hair. She was just standing there staring at me." Olivia froze. Her skin crawled. "You're sure you weren't dreaming?" she asked, barely managing to keep her voice steady. "I was wide awake," Mia said. "I'd just gotten up to use the bathroom. I thought it was you at first, but she wasn't." "Right." Olivia didn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither did Mia. In the morning, Mia left early and avoided talking about it. That weekend, Olivia decided to visit the local library and dig into the building's history. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, just something to explain everything. She found a collection of old newspaper clippings on microfilm. One article stood out. In 1973, a young woman named Emily Chen had lived in the same building, Unit 2B, the very apartment Olivia now called home. According to the article, Emily had been reported missing by her family after they hadn't heard from her for days. When police finally forced their way in, they found her in the bathtub. She died by suicide, her wrists slit open, a razor blade floating beside her. The article mentioned neighbors had heard her crying at night in the weeks leading up to her death. Olivia sat back in her chair, feeling sick. Back at the apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Every sound, the creaking floors, the faint hum of the refrigerator, made her jump. That night, she left every light on. At exactly 2:47 a.m., she woke to the sound of sobbing. It was coming from the hallway. Olivia lay frozen in bed, unable to move. The crying grew louder, closer. Her bedroom door, which she always left cracked open, slowly creaked wider. She could feel it. Someone was there, just out of view. With her heart slamming in her chest, she finally whispered, "Emily?" The crying stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then something cold brushed against her arm. Olivia screamed and bolted upright. The room was empty. After that night, she tried to break her lease. The property manager was apologetic, but firm. "We require at least 60 days' notice," he said, "and you'll lose your security deposit." She started spending more nights at friends' places, but always had to come back eventually. Her work was suffering, her appetite disappeared, and sleep became something she dreaded. One morning, after a particularly restless night, she found deep scratches on the inside of her bedroom door. 4 long marks, like fingernails, had clawed through the wood. She stood there, numb, trying to understand. She didn't have any pets. No one had been over in days. She hadn't done it in her sleep. She was sure of that. Then came the whispering. It started faint, barely audible, just under the hum of her computer or the murmur of the TV. A woman's voice repeating the same phrase over and over, "Let me in, let me in, let me in." Sometimes it came from the kitchen, other times from behind the bathroom mirror. Once she heard it directly behind her while brushing her hair. She turned around so fast she nearly fell over. Nothing was there, but her hairbrush was missing. She found it the next day, resting neatly on the windowsill. She reached a breaking point when she came home one afternoon to find all the cabinets in the kitchen wide open. Every single one. Her silverware was arranged in a spiral on the counter. Her fridge stood open, food rotting inside. She hadn't been gone more than 2 hours. Desperate, she called a local paranormal group she'd found online. She didn't even care how ridiculous she sounded. The group, 3 women and a man in their 50s, arrived with equipment and a somber attitude. They walked through the apartment slowly, speaking softly among themselves. One woman, Sandra, paused in the bathroom. "She was here," she said quietly. "She's still here." Olivia didn't want to ask who. They set up a recorder in the hallway, just outside her bedroom. After 2 hours of silence, they packed up. "We'll analyze the audio," they promised. "We'll call you in a couple days." That night, Olivia stayed in a hotel. 2 days later, she got the call. "Olivia," Sandra said, "we got something. Do you want to hear it?" "Play it," she said, gripping the phone tight. There was static at first, then the unmistakable sound of sobbing. A woman, crying, soft at first, then louder. And then a whisper. "I can't find the door. I can't find the door." Olivia broke the lease the next day, forfeiting her deposit. She moved into a small studio in a newer building across town. No hardwood floors, no old pipes. She bought a nightlight and never slept without the TV on. Months passed. Life got quieter again. She still had nightmares sometimes, and the sound of crying would haunt her dreams, but waking life returned to something like normal. But one night, as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard it. Very faint, very close, a whisper. "Let me in." Story the end.
Story number 7.
The apartment was on the second floor of a boxy, 4-story building nestled on a narrow street that ran behind a defunct train line. The area was quiet, mostly older tenants and a few young professionals who kept to themselves. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, clean, and available, 3 things that were getting harder and harder to find in the city. Nora signed the lease in under 10 minutes and moved in a week later with 2 suitcases, a mattress, and a sense of uneasy excitement. The first few days were quiet, almost too quiet. No barking dogs, no traffic, no music. The building had a peculiar stillness about it, like everything inside had been paused. The neighbors on her floor didn't make a sound. She hadn't seen a single person in the hallways. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed reluctant, as if it too knew it should keep its voice down. It wasn't until her 3rd night that Nora began to notice something unusual. She was brushing her teeth when she heard 3 deliberate knocks on the wall behind the bathroom mirror. Not loud, just solid. She froze, toothbrush hanging from her mouth, the foam sliding down her chin as she waited. She knocked back once, more out of curiosity than anything else. Silence. She rinsed and leaned close to the mirror, half expecting to see a crack or a rodent hole. Nothing. The next night, the knocking returned, this time while she was in bed. 3 knocks, always 3, always behind a wall. She told herself it was pipes, maybe water hammering. Old buildings did that. She even Googled it and watched a video of pipes knocking in a wall. It sounded similar, but not quite right. These knocks were rhythmic, intentional. By the 5th night, she was losing sleep. The knocking had moved to the living room wall, and once she could swear it directly beneath the hardwood floor by her bed. She got up and stomped on it. Nothing. She laid down and listened. It came again. 3 knocks. Same pace. Like a pattern, like someone would send a message in Morse code, except it was the same every time. She complained to the landlord, a man named Mr. Kravitz, who ran his office out of the back of a dry cleaning shop a few blocks away. He barely looked up when she explained the knocking. These old buildings, pipes, temperature changes, floors creak, don't worry. But it only knocks 3 times, always 3. That's probably just coincidence. Every night, she asked. He shrugged, handed her a brochure on renter's insurance, and moved on to the next call. Back at the apartment, she downloaded a sound recording app and left her phone on all night. The next morning, she scrolled through hours of silence until she found it. 2:41 a.m. 3 knocks, clear as day. She played it again and again. Her skin prickled each time. On the 8th night, something new happened. She woke up not to knocks, but to the sound of her front door opening. Not being unlocked, but swinging open with a groan. She bolted upright, heart hammering, and grabbed the bat she kept next to the bed. The hallway light was off. She crept to the door, flipped the switch, and found the door shut, locked, chain still in place. She checked every room, closet, bathroom, under the sink. No one. She didn't sleep that night. When morning came, she called her friend Marcy, who'd helped her move in. "I think someone's coming into my apartment at night," she said. "You sure it's not sleepwalking?" Marcy asked. "Or dreaming?" "I locked the door. I chained it. I don't sleepwalk." "Cameras," Marcy said. "Put up some cameras, or call the cops." Nora didn't want to call the police unless she had something solid, but she ordered 2 motion-detecting cameras that afternoon and set one facing the front door and one facing the living room. The next morning, she checked the footage. Nothing. No one. Just her asleep in bed, tossing and turning. But the audio feed had a new sound. Whispering. Soft, unintelligible whispering, like someone murmuring just beneath the microphone's range. It didn't last long, just a few seconds. Then 3 knocks. She turned off the video, heart racing. That night, she couldn't sleep. She left the lights on. She clutched her phone in bed and stared at the ceiling. She heard the knocks at 2:43 a.m., then again at 3:17. And then at 3:58, her phone vibrated, a motion alert. She tapped the feed. The camera facing the front door was active, but no one was there. The door didn't move. The hallway remained empty. Then the camera glitched for a second, and when it refocused, the door was ajar. Not fully open, just cracked. Nora screamed. She ran to the door. It was shut, locked, and chained. She went back to the video. The glitch was there, clear as before. A second of static. Then the door moved. She called Marcy. "You need to get out of there," Marcy said immediately. "I can't afford to break the lease. And where would I go?" "I'm coming over," Marcy said. "I'll stay a night. We'll figure it out." Marcy arrived that evening with an overnight bag, 2 sage bundles, and a look of barely restrained panic. She didn't laugh or joke like usual. Instead, she walked through the apartment slowly, touching the walls, listening. "It feels weird in here," she said finally. "Like heavy." Nora nodded. "It's worse at night." They lit one of the sage bundles, even though neither of them really knew what to do. They waved it around the apartment, windows open, smoke curling in the stale air. That night, they both slept in the living room on the pull-out couch. Around 2:30 a.m., the knocking started. 3 knocks, this time from inside the kitchen cabinet. They sat up. Marcy grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. They tiptoed to the kitchen and opened the cabinet. Nothing, just some cups and a cereal box. The knocking came again, from behind the wall. "Oh God," Marcy whispered. The whispering followed, soft and insistent. Nora leaned in closer. It was just sound. No words, like someone trying to speak with their mouth full of water. Then something fell in the bedroom. A loud crash. They rushed in. Her lamp was shattered on the floor. The window was shut, the fan off. "What the hell is going on here?" Marcy said, her voice shaking. They stayed up the rest of the night, every light on. The next day, they tried to find out if anything had happened in the building. Any deaths, fires, break-ins, anything. The city records were thin, and most of the neighbors refused to talk. One older woman on the 4th floor, Mrs. Penner, finally told them a story. There was a woman who lived here, maybe 5 years ago, young, pretty, always kept to herself, she said. "What happened to her?" Nora asked. "They found her in her apartment, dead. The story was she fell, hit her head, but people said they heard her screaming the night before." "Which apartment?" Mrs. Penner gave a slow, sad nod. "Yours." Nora felt her stomach turn. "Did she live alone?" Mrs. Penner hesitated. "She thought she did." They went back to the apartment and packed some essentials. Marcy refused to let Nora stay there another night. But before they left, Nora had an idea. She placed her phone on the kitchen counter and hit record. "Let's give it an hour," she said. "If anything happens while we're gone, we'll know." They went to a cafe nearby and waited. When they came back and played the recording, the apartment was silent for the first 20 minutes. Then whispering, followed by 3 knocks. Then a voice, clear, hoarse, and close to the mic. "Why did you leave?" They both dropped the phone. That night, they stayed at Marcy's apartment. Nora didn't sleep at all. She kept imagining the voice, the knocking, the movement of the door. Her dreams when she dozed were full of dark hallways and a woman whispering in corners. The next day, Nora went back one last time, in broad daylight. She packed the rest of her things. She didn't bother sorting, just stuffed everything into bags. She paused only once, at the bathroom mirror, the same one where she'd first heard the knocks. Her reflection stared back, pale and drawn. She turned to leave. And then 3 knocks, from inside the mirror. She didn't scream. She didn't turn around. She just walked out, locked the door, and left the key in the mailbox for the landlord. She found a new place, a studio far across town. Small and overpriced, but safe. No knocking, no whispers. Still, some nights, around 2:40 a.m., she wakes up without knowing why. She lies in bed listening, and sometimes just faintly she thinks she hears it again. 3 knocks. Story the end.
Story number 8.
I moved into the apartment on the last weekend of August, just after signing the lease and collecting the keys. It was a 3rd-floor unit in a 5-story walk-up in Queens. The building was old, pre-war probably, with flaking paint in the stairwells and radiators that hissed even in summer. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, or so the landlord said. Her name was Claire, I think. She'd been quiet, kept to herself, paid on time, and then just left. No forwarding address, no complaints. The landlord found the keys left on the kitchen counter, a month's rent unpaid. At first, I didn't mind the age of the place. It had charm. High ceilings, hardwood floors, those deep windowsills old buildings always seem to have. I liked the idea of starting over there. It was the first time I'd lived alone. No roommates, no shared kitchens or living rooms filled with someone else's noise. Just me. The first week was uneventful. The only thing I noticed was how quiet the apartment was. Sometimes too quiet. You'd think an old building with this many units would be loud. Footsteps, televisions, muffled conversations through the walls. But I rarely heard a thing. At night, the silence was thick. Occasionally, there'd be a soft creak, like the building was breathing, settling itself around me. On the 8th night, something strange happened. I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I had definitely closed it when I went to bed. I was particular about that. I always closed the door and turned on the small fan beside the bed, partly for the white noise. But the fan was off. The door half open. I told myself maybe I forgot to plug the fan in. Maybe the latch on the door was loose. But the feeling that settled in me as I stared at that open doorway wasn't one of forgetfulness. It was like I had just missed something. Like someone had been there and slipped out a moment before I opened my eyes. The next day, I checked the door. The latch was fine. It held when I pushed against it. The fan was still plugged in, but it didn't turn on. It was completely dead. I threw it out, bought a new one, and tried to shake the weirdness. 2 nights later, I woke again. This time, the door was wide open. I hadn't even heard it creak. I just opened my eyes and saw the dark hallway stretching past the frame. I felt something was wrong immediately. I sat up and listened. No traffic outside, no neighbors moving above me, no wind. Then, faintly, I heard a voice. It was a woman's voice, whispering. I couldn't make out the words. It was like it was coming from the living room, low, insistent, like someone talking to themselves or praying. I didn't get out of bed. I just sat there, heart pounding, listening to the whisper until it faded. I must have fallen back asleep at some point because when I woke up again, it was daylight. The door was closed again. That part bothered me more than anything. If I had left it open, fine. But closed again? I lived alone. No one else had keys. I asked the landlord if anyone had ever complained about break-ins or if maybe a super had come in without telling me. He shook his head. "You're the only one with keys to that unit," he said. "Well, besides me, but I don't just walk in." I didn't tell him about the whispering. I didn't tell anyone. That night, I moved a chair in front of the bedroom door, not because I thought it would stop anything, but I figured I'd hear it if it scraped the floor. I also left my phone recording, placed it on the dresser with the mic pointed toward the door. The next morning, the chair was still in place. The door was still shut. But when I checked the recording, I got chills. Around 3:14 a.m., there was a faint creak, then silence, then a whisper. Again, a woman's voice. I had to put headphones in to really hear it. It was saying, "Don't look at her, don't look at her." Over and over, for almost 3 minutes. Then a long silence, and then very clearly, "She's behind you." I turned the recording off. I didn't sleep at home for the next few nights. I stayed at a coworker's place and told him I was having issues with my mattress or something. I didn't want to explain the real reason because it sounded insane. I didn't even believe it myself. But when I finally returned, the atmosphere in the apartment had changed. The air was heavy, stale. It smelled faintly of perfume, something powdery and old, like a scent you'd find in your grandmother's closet. I checked every room. Nothing out of place, no signs of a break-in. But when I opened the bathroom cabinet, there was a toothbrush that wasn't mine. A pink one with bent bristles. I hadn't noticed it before. I threw it away immediately, hands shaking. That night, I tried sleeping with the lights on. I left every bulb burning. The kitchen, the hallway, the bathroom, even the closet. Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise, like something falling in the kitchen. I jumped out of bed and ran to check. A single plate had fallen from the drying rack to the floor. It didn't break, but it was spinning slightly on the tile, like it had been pushed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I started researching the apartment. I went through property records, news archives, anything I could find. There wasn't much, but I did find one small article from nearly 10 years ago. A woman named Claire Hammond, age 29, had been reported missing. Last seen at her apartment in Queens. Same address, no updates, no resolution. That night, I decided to try something desperate. I spoke out loud. "If you're here," I said, standing in the middle of the living room, "I don't mean you harm. I just want to live in peace. Please leave me alone." The silence afterward was suffocating. Nothing responded. No knock. No whisper. Just the hum of the refrigerator. But that night, I had the worst dream I've ever had in my life. I was lying in bed, but I couldn't move. I was awake in the dream, staring at the ceiling. The door opened slowly, creaking wide. A figure stepped in. It was a woman. Pale skin, matted hair, eyes too wide and too empty. She walked to the bed and stared down at me. Then she bent close to my ear and whispered, "You said, don't look." I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. The door was wide open. The lights I'd left on were off. My phone was dead. Not just low battery, dead. Wouldn't turn on until I plugged it in later. The final straw came 3 nights later. I woke up again at 3 a.m., but this time I wasn't alone in the bed. I couldn't see her. Not directly, but I felt her. The weight on the mattress beside me, the cold air against my neck, the whisper. I'm not done. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I just laid there paralyzed by fear until morning light seeped through the curtains. When I finally turned to look, there was no one there. But on the pillow beside mine, a long black hair. Not mine. I broke the lease the next day. The landlord didn't seem surprised. He just nodded and said, "Okay." I moved back in with my brother for a while, never told him the full story, just said the place had a weird vibe. He didn't press me. A month later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed me sleeping in the apartment, and in the background, just over my shoulder, the faint outline of a woman's face in the mirror. Story the end.
Story number 9.
When I moved into my new apartment, I was in the middle of a rough patch in my life. My long-term relationship had ended, I was changing jobs, and I needed a place that was affordable and close to the downtown area where I would be working. I found the listing on a community board in a coffee shop. It was handwritten, just a simple card that said, 1BR apt, quiet neighborhood, utilities included. The rent was low enough that I figured it was either a scam or some kind of dump, but I was desperate enough to check it out. It was in a nondescript building tucked behind a gas station and a shuttered hair salon. The structure itself was a beige 2-story with 8 units, 4 upstairs and 4 downstairs. The paint was peeling in places, but the lawn was neatly trimmed. The landlord, a man named Don, met me at the front. He was soft-spoken, middle-aged, and had a faint accent I couldn't place. I remember thinking he seemed oddly detached, but he handed me the keys with barely any questions. The apartment was on the 2nd floor, Unit 6. When I stepped inside, I was surprised at how clean it looked. It had a small living room, a kitchen with outdated appliances, a modest bedroom, and a bathroom with pink tiles. The walls were freshly painted, but there was a musty smell, like a closed-up attic. Still, I told myself it was nothing a few candles and open windows couldn't fix. I signed the lease that day. The first couple of weeks were uneventful. I didn't have much furniture, just a mattress on the floor, a fold-out table, a couple of chairs, and a lamp. Most of my stuff was still in storage. At night, I'd sit by the window with a beer, listening to the faint hum of traffic in the distance. There were few tenants in the building. I rarely saw anyone coming or going. The hallway was always quiet. Too quiet. It started with the floor creaks. I'd hear them in the middle of the night, slow, deliberate steps crossing the living room while I lay in bed. I'd get up expecting to see a raccoon or maybe a broken pipe causing the sound, but the room would be empty. The first few times I blamed the old building and temperature shifts. Old wood moves, right? But the pattern of those footsteps was always the same. 4 steps, pause, 2 more, then silence, like someone pacing. One night I came home late from work, and as I opened the door, I heard the bathroom sink running. I froze in the doorway. The light was off, but I could hear the water clear as day. I reached in, flipped the switch, and the sound stopped. The sink was dry. No drops, no moisture, just silence. I told myself I was overworked and paranoid. Still, I started leaving all the faucets off and unplugged at night. The 3rd week was when things shifted. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I felt someone sit down on the edge of the mattress. It was the distinct feeling of weight pulling down the bed near my legs. My eyes flew open, but the room was dark. I couldn't move at first. Just stared into the blackness, frozen. I thought maybe I was dreaming, in sleep paralysis. But when I reached for the lamp and flicked it on, the impression on the mattress was still there, like someone had just gotten up and walked away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. After that, it escalated. The cabinets would be open when I came home. Lights turned on when I was sure I had turned them off. Once I found the refrigerator door hanging wide open and all the food on the floor. I kept thinking maybe I was doing these things absent-mindedly, but deep down, I knew better. There's a certain kind of unease that builds like rot. It starts slow and quiet, and by the time you realize how deep it goes, it's already too late. I began hearing whispers. Not words exactly, just fragments of sound, like someone talking just outside the room, murmuring nonsense under their breath. Sometimes it sounded like a man, sometimes like a woman. Once, late at night, I was brushing my teeth and heard my own name whispered behind me. I spun around, heart thudding, but the hallway was empty. The lights flickered once, just once, then stayed on. I started asking around the building, trying to find someone who'd lived there longer than me. Most doors went unanswered. Some apartments looked like no one had lived in them for years. Finally, I met an older guy named Gerald who lived in Unit 2. He was in his 60s, wore a baseball cap indoors, and spoke with a kind of nervous cheer that didn't match his eyes. "Been here 8 years." He said when I asked how long he'd lived in the building. "You ever have anything weird happen?" I asked. He didn't answer at first, just stared at me like I'd said something forbidden. Then he nodded slowly. "You're in Unit 6, right?" I nodded. "Yeah. That one's tricky. I knew the last guy that lived there, quiet fella. Moved in about a year ago. One day he just disappeared, left all his stuff behind. Didn't even lock the door. Cops came, looked around, but there wasn't much to find. Don said he skipped on rent, but people don't leave without taking their wallet or their dog. What happened to the dog? Don't know. Some say they heard it howling the night before. Then nothing." I left Gerald's apartment feeling colder than when I entered. Over the next few days, I kept hearing scratching in the walls. Sometimes it was behind the headboard, other times near the bathroom tiles, like someone trying to claw their way out. I couldn't find any signs of rats or insects, just the sounds, and they always stopped when I tried to record them. The worst was the mirror. There's a small mirror above the sink in the bathroom, and one night as I stepped in to brush my teeth, I saw something in the reflection. It was quick, just a flash, but I saw it. A figure standing behind me. Tall, thin, its face shadowed. I turned around, but nothing was there. My legs almost gave out. I stood there for minutes, trying to breathe, to convince myself it was a trick of light. But then I looked back in the mirror, and the reflection was wrong. The bathroom behind me looked off, like it belonged in another building. The walls were a different color, the tiles mismatched, and I swear there was someone crouched in the far corner. I blinked, and it was normal again. I started sleeping on the couch with the lights on. I tried contacting Don, but he never picked up. I left messages, went to his office, nothing. It was like he'd vanished. The mailbox outside the building was overflowing. I even thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I saw a different version of my bathroom in a mirror? Then one morning, I woke up, and all my pictures were turned around. Every photo, every frame, flipped backward, even the ones in drawers. That was the day I decided I couldn't stay any longer. I took the day off work, packed what I could in the car, and booked a room at a cheap motel. When I came back the next day to grab the rest, the apartment was locked from the inside. I stood there with the key in my hand, but the knob wouldn't turn. It was like someone had bolted it from within. I called the building manager's emergency line and finally got someone, Don's brother, apparently. He came out after an hour, opened it with a master key, and let me in. Nothing looked out of place, but it felt darker. Not in terms of lighting, but something else, a thickness in the air. I packed the last few boxes without looking around too much and left for good. A month later, I got a call from a blocked number. When I answered, it was a man's voice, calm, monotone. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Miss what?" "The apartment." I hung up. I never got another call, but to this day, I can't walk past beige buildings without getting that same tightness in my chest. I still check mirrors twice, and some nights when I'm half asleep, I swear I feel the weight of someone sitting at the end of my bed. Story the end.